morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here today with Ministers Varadkar and Norma Foley, firstly to mark the achievements of women on International Women's Day, but also to respond to the call for more action. Until we have full equality between men and women, parity, we are a republic unfinished. Throughout history, women and girls carried a disproportionate share of caring responsibilities and have been discriminated against in the home and the workplace. We can be the generation that changes all of that. Very often women have been overlooked, objectified, or lived in fear of domestic or gender-based violence. We can be the generation that ends that. As a government, we committed to responding to the matters raised by the Citizens' Assembly and the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Gender Equality and to empowering women and girls. As part of our response, we're announcing today that referenda will be held in November 2023 to amend the Constitution as recommended by the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality and the Special Joint Oireachtas Committee ably chaired by Deputy Ivana Bacik. 86 years in existence, Bunreacht na hÉireann has served us well, but it needs to be modernised. The Constitution serves to protect rights and freedoms, and its principles have a profound effect on the state and citizens and on the power of the Oireachtas to legislate. While predominantly positive, the Constitution is not truly reflective of the modern Ireland we all know today. One of the ways of dealing with discrimination is to identify it and to end it. Discriminatory language which perpetuates gender stereotypes doesn't have a place in our Constitution in the 21st century. Sometimes we can also fail to properly recognise the important role that men and fathers play in family life, and that families are diverse, often led by lone parents, grandparents and guardians, not just married couples. For most of us, our families are our anchor, providing security and love no matter its makeup, the people who are always on your side. But that's why we need to consider a more inclusive definition of family, going beyond those solely based on marriage and reflecting what is the reality of modern Irish life. The Government is grateful for the work of the Citizens' Assembly and the Joint Oireachtas Committee. Both were established to challenge barriers, social norms and attitudes which facilitate gender-based discrimination. Apart from constitutional change, these reports set out a series of comprehensive recommendations to set us on the path of becoming a world leader on gender equality in all its forms. We're already seeing significant improvements in terms of childcare costs, the gender pay gap, parental leave, and in our response to combating domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Since January, all families accessing early learning and school-aged childcare have seen a reduction in costs. Working with Minister O'Gorman and subject to the public finances, we intend to do more in future budgets to help parents with these costs and to improve the quality of early years education and care. We're increasing parents' leave this year so that both parents can spend more time with their children in those vital early years. This week, the Government also agreed to bring forward legislation providing greater gender balance on corporate boards ahead of the EU deadline of 2026. And my colleague Emer Higgins TD has brought forward a private member's bill on this. We've also commenced the drafting of legislation to create a new statutory agency dedicated to dealing with and reducing gender, domestic and sexual violence. And Minister Helen McEntee will complete work on this when she returns from maternity leave. One of its responsibilities will be overseeing and aiding the provision of refuge accommodation for victims based on our commitment to double the number of refuge places and increase the number of safe homes. And we will see additional places this year. But I know that's not enough, and the job is far from done. And I hear from my sisters, my female friends, colleagues and constituents about the barriers that still exist and the obstacles that still remain in the way. The glass ceiling is far from shattered. In view of the fundamental importance of questions on care to women's equality, proposals to amend the Constitution will be put to the people in a referendum or referenda in November of this year. To kickstart this, we're convening an interdepartmental group which will meet for the first time this month, and we expect to have final wording for the proposed referenda in the early summer. We believe that we'll have a referendum bill or bills enacted and concluded by the end of September, subject to the cooperation of the Dáil and Seanad, after which referendum campaigns will commence and the decision will be made by the Irish people. Gurmil Mahagav, and happy International Women's Day.
Thanks very much, Taoiseach, and I'm really pleased to be here today with you all on International Women's Day to announce referendums on strengthening gender equality within our Constitution. And our Constitution is a central expression of the values we hold as a state and the values we hold as a nation. And yet Ireland now is not the Ireland of 1937. We've modernised the Constitution to reflect today's values and to reflect an Ireland that is truly committed to equality. Over the years, and particularly in the last decade, we've amended and modernised Bunreacht na hÉireann. However, the language of both Article 40.1 and Article 41 in particular remain anachronistic. The idea of family has changed, and in particular, it's not for the state to prescribe where a woman's place is. Our programme for government committed to a referendum on removing the reference to a woman's place in the home. Today's announcements build on the work done by the Citizens' Assembly on gender equality and the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the same. And I'd in particular like to thank their respective chairs, Dr. Catherine Day and Deputy Ivana Bacik, for their work. Recognising that this referendum has been a long time coming, we're setting out a tight timeline in which to hold it. An interdepartmental group has been established with the intention of bringing proposed wording to Cabinet in May, having legislation published in June, passed by both houses of the Oireachtas in September ahead of November's polling date. I believe that these changes are long overdue, and I look forward to the work ahead in terms of delivering this significant change to our Constitution. Thank you.
Good morning to you all, and I'm very pleased to be here and to wish you all a happy International Women's Day. It's a unique opportunity to shine a light, if you like, on the achievements, the capability and the abilities of women. I've always been struck by the observation of the writer Virginia Woolf, who once remarked that for most of history, anonymous was a woman. I think days like today, and in fact I would say every day, should be an opportunity where we take the time to readjust the lens, if you like, through which we view the accomplishments and the contributions of women to society. The theme this year is embracing equity, and I think that's a particularly salient theme for me as Minister for Education and all of us in the education sector, because fundamentally and passionately in education, we believe about equality of opportunity for all of our students. And in our schools, we encourage all of our students, and today we highlight our female students, we encourage them to believe in the limitless opportunities that are there for them in terms of the career paths they might choose, whether through STEM or any other type of career path they might choose, apprenticeship, whatever the case might be. Equally so in terms of sport or any opportunity they might wish to pursue in life. We in education know of the power and potential to level the playing pitch. And I'm very conscious that today some people dismiss a day like today as a tokenistic day. Now, I disagree personally with that. I think we should take every opportunity that we have to highlight the achievements of women. I'm very conscious that Maya Angelou once remarked that each time a woman stands up for herself, she stands up for all women. So today, we stand up for mothers, daughters, sisters, best friends. The list is absolutely endless. We reaffirm our pledge valuing each woman's individual contribution to society. A society, I believe, that continues to be enriched and enhanced by the contribution of women. We as women stand united because we're very conscious that our voices echo louder and longer as a collective. We encourage, nurture and support each other, providing a visibility that affords the next generation a roadmap through which they can exceed their potential and reach incredible heights. To allow barriers to exist that prevent women from entering and enjoying any aspect of life, that's a denial to society. It's a denial of a rich natural resource of talent, endeavour and creativity. I'm really, really conscious that visibility for women matters. Visibility in the staff room, visibility in boardrooms, and indeed visibility at cabinet level. And on that note, I'm very conscious that we are moving towards local elections next year. And as a woman who's been involved in politics for very many years, particularly at local representative level too, I would take the opportunity to encourage more and more women to step forward, to put themselves forward. I do not regret a single day of public representation. They have been the best of days. Challenging of days, but the very best of days. And the more women we can encourage into politics, the better it is for the decision-making process, the better it is for the body politic. So I take the opportunity today on International Women's Day to encourage more and more women to become involved in politics. And to do, as I have said at the outset, to reset the lens, to reassert the narrative, and to ensure that no longer, in the history that will be written into the future, no longer will anonymous be woman. Thank you. Gurmeen Mahagav.
When do people might see some wording on this, and what might be some of the pitfalls that you might see? Care is obviously might seem a very straightforward word that we all care a lot about. It's a very contentious potential word, and people will be watching it very closely. What would be some of the pitfalls you might see in these referendums?
Yeah, there's never anything straightforward about changing the constitution, and one thing we have to consider is how any change in the constitution might be interpreted by the courts. We need to go into any constitutional change with their eyes open in that regard. And we also need to consider whether there should be enabling legislation. So you'll remember for the referendum, for example, on marriage equality, on repealing the eighth, on children, we didn't just change the constitution, we also published the enabling legislation to show people what this would mean in practice. So all that has to be worked through over the next few months. And the other thing we need to consider is whether it'll be one omnibus referendum or whether it'll be potentially 2 or 3 referendums, because the committee and the Citizens' Assembly actually proposed 3 changes. A referendum or wording to enshrine equality in our constitution, wording to correctly define that there's more to families than families based in marriage, and then thirdly, that we should delete the section on women in the home in favour of a section recognising the importance of care in our society. So it's actually 3 potential changes to the Constitution. Need to understand how the courts might interpret that, so we go in eyes open and need to decide whether we need enabling legislation. If we do, should that be published? Because when referendums are lost, they're generally lost because of lack of preparation, and we're not going to make that mistake this time, and that's why we're giving ourselves that 8-month period to get it right. I don't think anyone could possibly not want to recognise the role of care and carers in our constitution, but I do think it will bring other questions to the fore. You know, for example, disability. Is that not going to be recognised in the Constitution as well, for example? And then also, what does that mean in practice? I know in the UK, for example, they have a Care Act. Do we need to set out in legislation what this means? I don't think anybody is interested in a constitutional change that is cosmetic. We do want to modernise the language of the Constitution, of course, but we don't just want to do that. If you're going to confer new rights on people and new responsibilities on the state, they should be meaningful. But you should, in the course of the campaign, be able to explain what they are and what they're not. So that's the kind of detailed work that has to be done. Another thing that has to be done as well, and when you dig into the anatomy of government, you really start to understand these things in a way that I wouldn't have in the past, but I know from being involved in previous referendums, what you need very early on is the lawyers in the room and the translators in the room, because of course, Tá Gaeilge an príomhtanga agus an teanga príomhfigúil san Stáit, so we have to make sure that the wording in Irish actually is correct too. And anyway, it's a lot of work to be done, but we'll do it.
Thanks for coming, Minister. You're only 20 minutes late. Can I ask about, to define your mention of referenda? You explained there that you might have to have an omnibus involving all aspects of reforming care and the women's place in the home and adjusting for equality elsewhere. But have you given any thought to other constitutional questions that are looming, such as the right to water or the claimed right to housing, because it might enable a better turnout than we saw in a November referendum in 2013, where only 33% of the population came out to vote on the question of protecting children. Again, a very noble idea, but only 58% of people voted in favour and 42% voted against. That was quite close for comfort, I would suggest. And following on from that, are you worried that if you do bundle maybe three questions, that the nature of the Irish public and electorate is so volatile now that you're likely to get hit by one being voted down as a result of general public unhappiness with the government? Thank you.
Yeah, look, we have to bear all that in mind. We haven't had a referendum, I think, in 4 or 5 years in Ireland. I know that might come as a surprise, but between changes of government and the pandemic and other reasons, we haven't made any reforms to the Constitution, I think, since 2018, could be 2019. So there are a number of referendums or potential referendums that are now, if you like, on the list. One that has been around for some time is an amendment to allow us to join the International Patent Court, which now is up and running. We haven't done that yet. That's one that is probably the most advanced. We haven't decided whether or not we'll have that in November with these or not. We are awaiting wording from our proposed wording from the Housing Commission in relation to housing, so that one has a way to go yet. And then, of course, there's some work done already on changing the franchise for presidential elections. You mentioned water as well. So there's actually quite a number of potential referendums in the mix. We don't want to do them all in the one day. I think it'd be a bad idea to present people with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ballot papers. But we do think there is a window for constitutional change for referendum in November of this year, then potentially have other ones concurrent with the local and European elections next year. And then, of course, there's a presidential election in 2025. So, we need to kind of spread them out over that period. But this is the one that's most advanced. The Citizen Assembly is done, the Joint Oireachtas Committee is done, there is draft wording, and that's why we're proceeding with it. Look, I'm always a bit worried about turnout. Turnouts for general elections are very good. For local and European elections, they're not great, actually. Often barely half people turn out. And then for referendums that are on their own without candidates to vote for, they can be lower again. I think it was very different for the 8th and for marriage equality because they generated a huge amount of interest among the public. So the short answer is yes, but being afraid of a low turnout can't be a reason not to do the right thing. And we think this constitutional change is overdue and is the one that's most advanced in terms of it having been considered now by a Citizens' Assembly, a Constitutional Convention and a Joint Oireachtas Committee with draft wording. So it's the one that's most advanced and let's get it done.
Minister Bowman, we're aware that 1,600 beds will be lost out of the system for refugees by the end of next month. Where are you going to put those refugees? And now, given that the eviction ban has been lifted and, as the Housing Minister admitted himself, could lead to a rise in homelessness, has the situation become a lot more difficult for you now to find accommodation for refugees? And to the Taoiseach, it's International Women's Day today, but the lifting of the eviction ban will leave many women with young children in a situation where they won't actually have somewhere to go or a home in the coming weeks. What's your message to them, given that the lifting of the eviction ban could very much jeopardise their safety? And lastly, Minister Foley, you spoke about attracting women into politics. However, we've seen over the reporting over a year or so that the level of abuse at female politicians has accelerated. I know you're a victim of receiving some of that abuse yourself online. What would you like to see happen with the social media platforms, and also could the government do anything further to try and put a stop to this abuse? Thanks.
Thanks very much. So as you know, it has been difficult to secure additional accommodation over the last number of months. That being said, we have secured, since Christmas, we've secured 5,000 accommodation beds for Ukrainian displaced persons and 2,000 for international protection applicants. You're right, between the end of March and the end of April, we are under significant pressure. About 5 significant hotels will be leaving the international protection accommodation system. We are looking to put in place measures to bring on both additional private accommodation during that period of time. There's also measures that other government departments are taking, like the work the Taoiseach is doing through the Department of Defence, having already brought the Kilbride barracks online and work underway in Mullingar at the moment as well. And as you know, last week a decision was taken in Cabinet in terms of looking at alternative methods, particularly looking at the modular rapid build sphere and seeing how we can bring more there. So, as I say, it continues to be a difficult space, but we continue to work to secure that additional accommodation. But I think it is fair to say that people may have to move, and that obviously has impacts, particularly for families, that we may not be able to secure accommodation in the immediate area of where they're currently living, as that causes problems for everyone, particularly for families. But we just have to be upfront about the realities of the pressure. I can't say for everyone where they've been moved yet. No.
Yeah, just to answer your question, homelessness is a stain on our society. It's something that concerns all of us in government and all of us in politics every day. There are roughly 11,000 people, 1,600 families who are homeless and receiving emergency accommodation from the state at the moment. There are more men who are homeless than are women, so it is something that affects men and women and families and single people. It's a problem for all of our society. To people who are facing losing their home over the course of the next couple of months, government is here to help. We've ramped up the amount of social housing that's being built to record levels. We are putting in place additional emergency accommodation, although emergency accommodation is not the solution. And also we have in place now a mechanism whereby local authorities are enabled to purchase properties. So where the landlord is selling up and the person is on HAP or is a RAS tenant, is a social housing tenant, we want and we expect local authorities in the main to purchase those homes and move people from being HAP tenants to regular social housing tenants, which is what they should be anyway.
Thanks very much, Ciara. I suppose in the first instance I'd want to acknowledge the work of Minister Catherine Martin in terms of Comisiún na Meán and regulation and everything in that direction. That's hugely important. I think that's an extremely important body of work. In the main, I want to acknowledge too that vitriolic abuse on social media is not unique to women. I would absolutely say there are many men receiving similar. But I will say in terms of women, it's perhaps more personal. I'm very conscious of it myself. I see that it is there. I think many of my female colleagues would say the same. I don't allow it to deter me, though. I think that would be a shame. That would be a give-in. I absolutely believe that fundamentally we need to have women in politics. It is right in terms of diversity, in terms of decision making. It is right in terms of a reflection of society. And I think women should not, and I don't believe women will be deterred by what happens in social media. And the other thing I would say about that as well, what happens in social media oftentimes is anonymous. It's by people that don't know, won't meet, and it is not, absolutely not a reflection of the people that I meet every single day on a one-to-one basis. People I meet right throughout the country. I travel quite a bit throughout the country in terms of visiting to schools in my capacity as Minister for Education. Within my own constituency, they far, far outweigh the generosity, the goodwill, the decency of people far, far outweighs anything that you'd experience in social media. And I think we need to put that into perspective as well. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Verification of accounts. As you say, a lot of the abuse comes from anonymous accounts on social media. So should there be almost a two-step verification process? I understand that this has been called for, but there has been some reluctance from government to, I guess, enforce any further regulation on these social media companies, many of whom have their headquarters here in Dublin.
Yeah, well, look, in the first instance, I acknowledge that there is freedom of expression. I absolutely acknowledge that. I do think where there is anonymity, it gives further, I suppose, freedom in terms of what people will say and what they wouldn't say to you on a one-to-one basis. So, but I do think it's a balance that you have to strike too. But again, I want to emphasise, it is not a deterrent. It should not be a deterrent to people entering politics. It is one aspect of the experience of the political world. It is not the defining aspect of politics. And I think that's the most important thing and the most important message that I could get out today.
Into your consideration at all when you were deciding whether or not to lift the eviction ban that there would be a shortage of refugee accommodation, and that we've already seen a lot of protests and a lot of that kind of far right cohort saying, you know, the government can do X, Y and Z for the refugees and the international protection seekers, but yet they can't do X, Y and Z for the homeless people? Was that thought of at all? And then Minister O'Gorman, and we heard Nasa Horgan yesterday saying that she didn't believe that Green Party values or policies are represented by Eamon Ryan at the leaders' meeting on Monday. Do you think that was a fair assessment? Do you believe that you represented Green Party values at Cabinet yesterday?
Of course, we considered that, and I think one of the errors that is easily made in prescribing solutions to the housing crisis is only looking at one aspect of it and not seeing how everything is interlinked and how one action here can actually make things worse there. And that's something we have to give consideration to. And, you know, I think there's kind of a false argument being made at the moment that there's a conflict between the rights of landlords and the rights of renters. You know, renters need landlords and landlords need renters. And what's happened in the past number of years is 40,000 landlords have left the market, and they haven't been replaced by new landlords. And that's why people are in such long queues looking at a property when it becomes available. And that's why rents for properties that are new to the market are so high, because there are so few. And we need to get landlords back into the market, and we need to stem the number that are leaving. And when we made the decision that we did, we were taking into account primarily the interests of people who are renting and who are tenants and future renters, not just the interests of landlords. But it's a false argument, and I do hear that argument. You know, I run into people in my constituency who'd say to me, "You're doing X, Y, and Z for the Ukrainians, or you're doing X, Y, and Z for refugees, but you're not doing anything for the Irish homeless." Well, first of all, you know, nearly 40% of people who are in emergency accommodation or homeless aren't Irish citizens, and that's often missed. And secondly, you know, what we're doing for Ukrainians and what we're doing for people who have international protection is probably less than what we're doing for people who are registered as homeless. You know, unfortunately, there are people seeking international protection who are not able to offer accommodation at all to at the moment. And when it comes to Ukrainians, by and large, what we're doing is accommodating them in hotels and B&Bs. It's not great, but it's the best we can do. But the idea that somehow we're doing more for, you know, people from abroad than we are for our own citizens, that just isn't factually correct.
Landlords have left the market, but yet you didn't do anything to encourage or entice small landlords to stay in the market. Why didn't you when you saw the early warning signs about this? Was it because you feared that it would be politically toxic to do something for landlords? No,
we have done things for small landlords. For example, we restored fully mortgage interest relief. So a landlord can offset the full value of their mortgage payments against tax. So that was a very major tax change that we made in favour of landlords. And there will be some other smaller things as well. But I do think that there has been a demonisation of landlords by our political system and by wider society over the past number of years. That hasn't worked. In fact, it's caused harm. It's made rents higher. It's made fewer properties available. It's really hurting people, particularly those who need to rent for the first time, young people, new arrivals in the country, and people who need to move who aren't protected by the rent pressure zones. And I think that needs to change. And, you know, we need to have regard to that now as a government and not be afraid to introduce measures that do encourage landlords to stay and come into the market. And also the opposition needs to stop it too. You know, I hear what they're saying. You know, what's the Sinn Féin solution to this problem? They want a new tax on landlords, another £400 a year. You know, how could that possibly make things better?
Yeah, just I don't agree with that criticism of Eamon. I think Green Party principles and Green Party policy is woven into the government's response on housing. I think that's seen in the context of that overall critical need to increase supply, and particularly increase supply in social housing. And as Taoiseach has already spoken about the success that was achieved there last year, it's seen in the context of principles like building public housing on public land. That was something that was very much a key view of the Green Party, and is being secured now on some very major sites around Dublin City and Cork City as well. And I think it's also reflected in the introduction of cost rental, which has been, as long as I've been in the Green Party, was a key policy that we needed this new type of tenure. This government has introduced that type of tenure. It's committed to 18,000 units of cost rental by the end of 2030 under Housing for All. And even yesterday we saw that this idea of the cost rental backstop is going to be used as part of the very immediate response to the increased level of people facing the loss of rental right now. So I think Green Party policies are very much built into the government's housing response.
The 5 hotels you mentioned that are leaving the system, around about how many people are they accommodating at the moment, and what is the hold-up on the modular housing? We've heard about these plans for almost a year now, but we haven't seen any of them open or anything like that. And Taoiseach, are you considering modular housing at all to address the wider homeless situation?
Thanks, Adam. So there's 1,600 people accommodated in those 5 hotels at the moment, and they will be leaving the system between the end of March and the end of April. In terms of modular accommodation, obviously modular accommodation is a brand new housing approach being adopted by the government. They're under construction on 5 sites at the moment. I know certainly in the site in Cork, some of the units are in place at the moment. So I think in the towards the end of April, early May, we'll see the first of those sites being officially opened for use. They're going to be used for Ukrainians currently. So there's, as I say, 5 sites at the moment, and there's another 10 sites that will be developed over the course of the year. 700 units in total, accommodating around 2,800 individuals.
Yeah, we are going to use modern methods of construction, including modular housing, to house people from Ukraine, refugees from other parts of the world, and indeed people who are homeless and are on the social housing list. I understand that some local authorities may be doing that already, but I'd have to double check that. But I think there does need to be a little bit of a reality check around modern methods of construction and modular housing. It's great, it's part of the solution, but it doesn't mean that you can put up tens of thousands of units in a few weeks or a few months. That's not the case. And we'll see very good examples of modular builds in the next couple of weeks, and they'll be ready to occupy. But you still need to order them. They still need to be manufactured. They still need to arrive. They still need to be installed. The bridges that you have to pass under to get the modular home to the site have to be high enough, and also the site has to be serviced with electricity, with water and gas. So I think sometimes people present this as a quick fix solution, and why isn't the government doing it? We've done a huge amount of work on this. It's going to happen. You're going to see these units very, very soon, people living in them. But I need to be honest about a bit of realism around this. It's not particularly cheaper. In fact, it's probably not cheaper at all. And while it is quicker, it's not doable in a few weeks. You still have to go through all those processes and have the site ready and the things I explained. So yes, it's part of the solution, but let's not pretend that there's some sort of quick fix that we, hadn't done already, because there isn't.
Oh, I don't want to even had it. Taoiseach, just going back to the referendum for a moment, you mentioned in your answer to Sen the prospect of there being some enabling legislation or something published alongside as well. Can you just put a bit more meat in the bones there? Does that mean that you are going to be actively proposing some change in legal status, or will you be proposing to enact some scheme that you can't currently do? Because otherwise, although the referendum might be seen as symbolic, it might be seen as symbolic and symbolic only.
Yeah, well, symbols are important, and I actually think removing gendered language from our constitution is something worth doing in its own right. But what I am saying is that we want to explore between now and May or June whether we need to do more than that. And there are potential implications on existing law, for example. For example, as only one small example, and maybe I shouldn't bring it up, but I am going to bring it up. One of the issues, that if you say that family rights are not solely based on marital families, like at the moment in theory in Irish law anyway, a same-sex couple with kids married are a family. A opposite-sex couple with kids are a family, but a lone parent family isn't actually a family under the Constitution, nor is a family led by a guardian, for example, or a grandparent. But if you say that is a family, does that affect some of our existing laws around rights that are associated with families? So that's the work that has to be done, and that's why we need, the interdepartmental group, the AG across this, justice, everyone, and that's the work that needs to be just bottomed out now in the next a couple of weeks, so that we understand what the amendments mean, and that we're able to answer the hard but appropriate questions that anyone's going to be asked in a referendum campaign. Cash biog éisce as gaeilge.
It's just rolling Cadaveg or shoe no Cadatha or Vola egg and realtis mother lesson reference.
Okay, well, Soccer gan realtis Gemeg referen imi hauna con on bonop ahru son mana son Colini son equality idir mana agus fear mar is a gut tá gaelga on príomhtanga if a ghoul. So beg sé táhachtach beg translorahor beg dini gaelgori lífa sa siomra.